The year is 1453. The great, triple-layered Theodosian Walls, the impregnable shield of Christendom for over a millennium, are crumbling under the relentless thunder of massive Ottoman cannons. Inside the city, the air is thick with the scent of ozone, fear, and the final, desperate prayers of a civilization on the brink of extinction. Emperor Constantine Roman XI Palaiologos, the last heir to the Caesars, discards his imperial regalia. He knows that when the walls finally yield, he will not be taken as a prisoner. He draws his sword, plunges into the chaotic sea of the final melee, and vanishes into the pages of legend, never to be seen again. This is not just the story of a city falling. It is the death rattle of the Roman Empire. For over 1100 years, this city, Constantinople, stood as the golden bridge between the ancient world and the dawn of the Renaissance. It was a civilization defined by intrigue, blinding opulence, unbreakable faith, and a military machine that defied the tide of history. But how did a city built on the ruins of a Greek fishing village become the most powerful entity on the planet? And how, when the rest of the world plunged into the darkness of the Middle Ages, did the Byzantines keep the fires of knowledge and power burning bright? This is the epic saga of the Byzantine Empire. Introduction 0, 45-2, 30. To understand the Byzantine Empire, we must first shatter a common misconception. The people who lived in Constantinople never called themselves Byzantines. To them, they were Romans, the direct, unbroken successors of Augustus and Trajan. They were the citizens of the Basileia Ramaean asterisk, the Roman Empire, which had simply shifted its center of gravity from the Tiber to the Bosphorus. The story begins in the 4th century, a time of profound crisis. The Western Roman Empire was fracturing under the weight of civil war, economic collapse, and relentless incursions by Germanic tribes. Amidst this chaos, one man saw the future: Constantine the Great. Situated at the crossroads of Europe and Asia, controlling the narrow straits between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean, the city was virtually unassailable by land or sea. It was a strategic fortress designed to oversee the richest provinces of the ancient world: Egypt, Syria, and Asia Minor. This empire would endure through the fall of the West, through the rise of Islam, through the Crusades, and through the Black Death. It was a state defined by a unique synthesis: the iron-fisted legal tradition of Rome, the intellectual depth of ancient Greece, and the mystical, fervent devotion of Eastern Christianity. From the sprawling palaces of the emperors to the secret, deadly machinations of the imperial court, the Byzantine story is one of extremes. It is a tale of emperors blinded by their own kin, of scholars who preserved the wisdom of Plato while the West burned, and of a military that pioneered the most terrifying weapon of the medieval world: Greek fire. As we embark on this two-part chronicle, we will peel back the gilded veil of the Byzantine state. We will explore how this empire functioned as a bulwark against the East, how it influenced the formation of Slavic cultures, and why its eventual collapse fundamentally reshaped the map of the modern world. This is not merely a history of a lost empire. It is the history of the foundation of Western civilization itself. Section 1. The foundation of the New Rome, the strategic genius of Constantine the Great, cannot be overstated. By choosing Byzantium, rechristened Constantinople, he placed the capital at the nexus of the world's most vital trade routes. By 330 AD, the city was transformed into a bustling, imperial metropolis, with a harbor protected from the currents and walls that would eventually become the envy of the world. It was designed to be eternal. The true nature of the empire was forged in the decades following Constantine. It was a world of shifting borders and religious transformation. As the 4th century bled into the 5th, the empire faced its first true existential threat: The encroaching Visigoths and Huns, the defeat of Emperor Valens at Adrianople in 378 AD, sent shockwaves through the Mediterranean. It was a catastrophe that forced the empire to reconsider its defensive posture. The result was the construction of the Theodosian Walls, a triple-layered marvel of engineering that would remain undefeated for over 1,000 years. These walls, spanning 4 miles across the peninsula, were a testament to the Roman obsession with order and security. Inside the city, the culture began a slow metamorphosis. The Latin tongue of the legions slowly gave way to the sophisticated lyrical Greek of the East. This was not a decline, but a refinement. The administration became more bureaucratic, more intricate, and more centralized. The emperor was no longer just the first among equals, as the early Caesars had styled themselves. He was now the Basilius *, the living representative of God on earth. This divine sanction gave the state an ideological armor that protected it through even the darkest of winters. By the end of the 5th century, the Western Empire had officially collapsed under the weight of Odoacer and his mercenaries, leaving Constantinople as the sole torchbearer of the Roman legacy. While Rome itself was reduced to a provincial town, Constantinople boomed. Wealth flowed into the Golden Horn, financing massive public works, glorious basilicas, and an elite guard that was the envy of all neighbors. The Byzantine state had successfully transitioned from a failing Mediterranean power into an Eastern titan, ready to reclaim its lost destiny. This was the era of consolidation, where the Roman spirit was distilled, refined, and hardened for the trials that lay ahead in the 6th century. Pope of the empire, Justinian I. Born to a peasant family in Illyria, he was an intellectual giant with an unyielding ambition. Alongside his formidable wife, Theodora, a former actress who became his equal in power, Justinian sought to do the impossible, to reunite the shattered fragments of the Roman world. He launched a series of daring campaigns to reclaim Italy, North Africa, and parts of Spain from the Germanic kingdoms that had carved up the West. Under his brilliant generals, Belisarius and Narses, the Byzantine legions marched once more through the streets of Rome and Carthage. It was a glorious, if ultimately Pyrrhic, era of reconquest. Yet, Justinian's ambitions went beyond the battlefield. He understood that an empire is held together by more than just swords. It is held together by law and faith. He commissioned the Corpus Juris Civilis *, the monumental codification of Roman law that serves as the foundation for the legal systems of most modern nations today. He was also a master builder. After the Nika riots nearly destroyed the city in 532 AD, Justinian ordered the construction of the Hagia Sophia. When the massive dome was completed, it was said that there was nothing like it on Earth. Its interior, bathed in golden light and adorned with breathtaking mosaics, was designed to evoke the heavens themselves. It stood as a symbol of the synthesis of imperial authority and Christian dogma. However, this golden age came at a terrifying price. The wars of reconquest drained the imperial treasury, and the arrival of the plague of Justinian in 541 AD decimated the population. The pandemic, which spread across the trade routes, killed millions and left the empire critically understaffed and vulnerable. By the time of Justinian's death in 565 AD, he had restored the Mediterranean as a Roman leg, but he had also pushed the empire to the limits of its endurance. Gnawing fatigue of a society that had seen too much war. Section 3. The crucible of war and the birth of Greek fire. Following the exhaustion of the Justinianic era, the 7th century arrived with the force of a hurricane. The empire found itself caught in a death struggle between two superpowers, the Byzantine Empire and the Sassanid Persian Empire. For decades, they bled each other white, exhausting their resources and their manpower. In 626 AD, the two powers faced off in a climactic siege of Constantinople, with the Persians allied with the Avars. But the city held. The walls remained unbroken, and the faith of the people, who believed the Virgin Mary herself stood upon the ramparts, remained unshaken. Yet this victory was short-lived. A new, unstoppable force was rising in the deserts of Arabia. The Arab conquests in the 7th century were a shock to the Byzantine system. Within a few short decades, the empire lost its most prosperous provinces, Syria, Egypt, and the Levant. The loss of these breadbaskets and population centers would have destroyed a lesser state, but the Byzantines adapted. They reorganized their military into the *** system, a decentralized structure of provincial defense that allowed soldiers to hold land in exchange for military service. It was during this period of desperate survival that the Byzantines developed their most legendary defensive technology, Greek fire, a volatile, incendiary liquid that could be projected from siphons mounted on ships. It was the napalm of the Middle Ages. When it hit the water, it burned with even greater intensity, turning the sea into a hellscape of flames. It was a state secret, so closely guarded that its composition remains a mystery to this day. With the Arab fleets incinerated by Greek fire, Constantinople was saved time and time again. The empire was stripped of its grandeur and its vast reach, but it emerged more compact, more militarized, and more focused. And fiercely nationalist state. The Roman identity was now inextricably linked with the Orthodox faith, and the capital became an island of civilization in a sea of turbulence. Section 4. Iconoclasm and the spiritual schism. As the empire fought for its physical survival, it was simultaneously torn apart by an internal spiritual crisis known as iconoclasm. In 726 AD, Emperor Leo Roman III, convinced that the catastrophic defeats against the Arabs were divine punishment for the worship of icons, issued a decree to destroy all religious images. For over a century, the empire was convulsed by this theological civil war. Monasteries were shuttered, sacred art was defaced, and the empire's social fabric was shredded. The iconoclast movement was more than just a religious disagreement. It was a power struggle between the state and the church. By removing icons, the emperors sought to centralize their authority, removing the influence of the monks and the local bishops who derived power from the intercession of the saints. In the streets of Constantinople, this led to violent riots and purges. Those who defended the icons, the iconodules, were imprisoned or exiled, and the artistic heritage of centuries was systematically erased. This period of internal strife isolated the Byzantine Empire from the West. The Pope in Rome, horrified by the destruction of sacred imagery, began to look elsewhere for protection. This drift culminated in the coronation of Charlemagne in 800 AD as the Emperor of the Romans. To the Byzantines, this was an act of treason, a barbaric usurpation of their rightful title. The rift between the Latin West and the Greek East began to widen, eventually leading to the permanent schism that would define the religious landscape of Europe for a millennium. Despite the intensity of the iconoclast struggle, the empire did not break. By a second wave of iconoclasm, it highlighted the central tension of the Byzantine state, the desire for unity versus the diversity of belief. It was a period of introspection that forced the empire to define exactly what it meant to be Roman and Christian. When the icons were finally and permanently restored in 843 AD, the empire emerged with a renewed sense of religious fervor, a hardened orthodoxy that would become the primary cultural export of the Byzantine world to the emerging Slavic nations. Section 5. The Macedonian Renaissance and the Golden Age, by the 9th and 10th centuries, the empire entered what historians call the Macedonian Renaissance. Under the Macedonian dynasty, the Byzantines recovered their strength, pushing back the borders and reclaiming lost territories in the Balkans and the East. This was a period of unparalleled intellectual and artistic achievement. Scholars dusted off the manuscripts of the ancients. The imperial court became a beacon of luxury and diplomacy, and the city's population swelled to nearly 500,000 people. The most famous of these emperors, Basil II, the Bulgar Slayer, was a man of iron will. He transformed the Byzantine army into the most disciplined fighting force in Europe. His campaigns against the Bulgarian Empire were legendary for their brutality and precision. After the Battle of Claudion in 1014, it is said that he captured 15,000 Bulgarian soldiers, blinded 99 of every 100, and left one man with a single eye to lead the others home. It was a terrifying display of imperial power, effectively ending the Bulgarian threat for over a century and securing the borders of the empire from the Danube to the Euphrates. During this time, the Byzantines also turned their attention to the north. Through a combination of trade, diplomacy, and the conversion of the Rus to orthodoxy, the empire exerted a soft power that would shape the future of Russia, Ukraine, and the Balkans. Staggering. Foreign envoys visiting the palace were greeted by mechanical lions that roared and birds that sang, a display of engineering meant to awe and intimidate. The silk industry was a state monopoly, and the trade in spices and luxury goods made the Byzantine nobility the wealthiest in the world. It was a time of confidence and stability. However, this golden age also masked deep-seated problems. The concentration of land in the hands of a few powerful aristocratic families began to undermine the *theme* system, and the reliance on mercenaries instead of citizen soldiers began to erode the military's connection to the state. The empire had regained its status as the hegemon of the medieval world, but the seeds of the next great crisis were already being sown in the fields of Anatolia, where a new nomadic threat was gathering on the horizon. Section 6. The Macedonian Renaissance and the iron will of the Bulgar Slayer. As the 9th century dawned, the Byzantine Empire emerged from the dark clouds of iconoclasm and the initial shock of the Arab conquests, entering a period of renewed vigor known as the Macedonian Renaissance. This era was defined by the Macedonian dynasty, a line of formidable soldier emperors who transformed the state from a defensive shell into a resurgent superpower. The pinnacle of this resurgence arrived in the person of Basil II, who ascended to the throne in 976. Basil was not a man of luxury. He eschewed the silks of the court for the rough wool of a soldier's cloak, spending nearly his entire 50-year reign on horseback. His primary objective was the systematic destruction of the First Bulgarian Empire, a rival state that had long threatened the security of the Byzantine heartland. The conflict reached its brutal climax at the Battle of Claudion in 1014. In the rugged mountain passes of the Balasica Mountains, Basil outmaneuvered the Bulgarian Tsar Samuil, capturing approximately 15,000 soldiers. "99 men were completely blinded, while the 100th man was left with one eye to lead his comrades back to their Tsar. When the blinded army finally reached Samuil, the sight was so horrific that the Tsar reportedly suffered a stroke and died 2 days later. This ruthless display earned Basil the epithet Bulgaratonos, the Bulgar Slayer. By 1018, Bulgaria was annexed, and the Byzantine border once again reached the Danube River for the first time in centuries. Under Basil II, the empire's treasury swelled to an unimaginable 200,000 pounds of gold. The borders stretched from the mountains of Armenia in the east to the Adriatic Sea in the west. Yet, this golden age was not merely built on bloodshed. The Macedonian era saw a massive revival in Greek scholarship, law, and art. The Basilica, a massive 60-book codification of Roman law, was finalized, ensuring the legal continuity of the Roman tradition. Byzantine missionaries, most notably Cyril and Methodius, had previously spread the Orthodox faith and the Cyrillic alphabet to the Slavic peoples, bringing them into the Byzantine cultural orbit, a legacy that persists in Eastern Europe to this day. Constantinople itself was the envy of the world, a city of nearly 500,000 people where the Hagia Sophia's golden mosaics shimmered under the light of 1,000 oil lamps, symbolizing a state that believed it was the earthly reflection of the kingdom of heaven. When Basil II died in 1025, he left behind an empire that was the wealthiest, most stable, and most technologically advanced power in the Mediterranean. However, he left no heir of his caliber, and the seeds of a rapid, catastrophic decline were already beginning to germinate within the imperial bureaucracy. Section 7. The Great Schism and the shadows of Manzikert, the mid-11th century, marked a pivotal turning point where the internal stability of Byzantium began to fracture under the weight of religious discord and new external threats. Tensions between the Pope in Rome and the Patriarch in Constantinople reached a breaking point over issues such as the Filioque clause in the Nicene Creed and the use of unleavened bread in the Eucharist. Cardinal Humbert, a representative of Pope Leo Roman IX, famously marched into the Hagia Sophia during the Divine Liturgy and slammed a bull of excommunication onto the high altar. The Patriarch, Michael Kerularios, responded in kind. This formal separation between the Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches severed the spiritual unity of Christendom, leaving Byzantium increasingly isolated from its Western neighbors, just as a new predator emerged on the eastern horizon, the Seljuk Turks, while the court in Constantinople was distracted by palace intrigues and the dismantling of the professional, thematic armies in favor of expensive foreign mercenaries. The Seljuks, a nomadic Turkic people from Central Asia, began raiding the Anatolian frontier. In 1071, Emperor Romanos Roman IV Diogenes led a massive but poorly coordinated army to confront the Seljuk Sultan Alp Arslan at Manzikert. The battle was a disaster of epic proportions. Betrayed by his own generals and plagued by desertions among his mercenary ranks, Romanos was captured, the first time a Roman emperor had been taken alive by a Muslim foe since the days of Valerian. Legend says that when Romanos was brought before Alp Arslan, the Sultan asked what he would have done if their positions were reversed. Romanos replied, "Perhaps I would kill you or exhibit you in the streets of Constantinople." Arslan's response was more humble. "My punishment is far heavier. I forgive you and set you free." Though the Sultan was merciful, the aftermath of Manzikert was anything but. The Byzantine defeat shattered the defense of Anatolia, the empire's primary source of grain, horses, and soldiers. As the Seljuks poured into the central plateau, establishing the Sultanate of Rum, the empire was reduced to a coastal power. By civil war and economic collapse, as rival generals fought over the scraps of a dying state. It would take the rise of the Komnenian dynasty to pull the empire back from the brink, but the price of survival would involve an uneasy and ultimately fatal alliance with the rising powers of Western Europe. Section 8. The Komnenian Restoration and the betrayal of the Fourth Crusade in 1081, Alexios I Komnenos seized the throne, inheriting a state on the verge of total dissolution. With the treasury empty and the Seljuks at the gates of Nicaea, Alexios turned to the west for help. His appeal to Pope Urban Roman II in 1095 was the catalyst for the First Crusade. While Alexios hoped for a small contingent of professional knights to serve as mercenaries, he was instead met with a massive, uncontrollable movement of Latin Christians driven by religious fervor and land hunger. The arrival of the Crusaders in Constantinople was a clash of civilizations. The Byzantines viewed the Westerners as unwashed barbarians, while the Crusaders saw the Byzantines as treacherous, effeminate schismatics. Despite these tensions, the Komnenian emperors, Alexios, John Roman II, and Manuel I, managed to use the Crusades to recover much of the Anatolian coastline and re-establish Byzantine hegemony in the Balkans and over the Crusader states in the Levant. However, this Komnenian restoration was built on fragile foundations. The empire became increasingly dependent on Italian maritime republics like Venice and Genoa for naval support, granting them trade privileges that gutted the Byzantine economy. When the Komnenian line failed and the incompetent Angelos dynasty took power, the resentment between East and West reached a flashpoint. In 1202, the Fourth Crusade was diverted from its original goal of Jerusalem by the Venetian Doge Enrico Dandolo, a blind, 90-year-old statesman who harbored a deep grudge against the Byzantines. Under the pretext of restoring a deposed prince to the throne, the Crusader fleet arrived before the walls of Constantinople in 1203. What followed was 3 days of systematic horror. The soldiers of Christ raped and murdered their fellow Christians, looted the Hagia Sophia, and smashed priceless bronze statues from antiquity to melt them down for coin. The great library of Constantinople, containing works of Greek literature lost to us today, was put to the torch. The Venetian Doge made off with the 4 bronze horses that now grace St. Mark's Basilica. The Byzantine Empire was partitioned into Latin states, and the imperial family fled into exile. Though the Byzantines would eventually retake their capital in 1261, the empire was forever broken. The sack of 1204 was a blow from which the Roman world would never truly recover, leaving it a hollowed-out shell of its former glory. Section 9. The Paleologan Twilight and the rise of the Ottomans in 1261. Michael Roman VIII Palaiologos, ruler of the Empire of Nicaea, managed to slip his forces into Constantinople during a lapse in Latin defenses, reclaiming the city and restoring the Byzantine Empire. To the citizens, it seemed like a miracle, a sign of divine favor. But the city Michael recovered was a ghost of its former self. Palaces were in ruins, the population had plummeted, and the treasury was non-existent. The Palaiologan dynasty, which would rule until the very end, presided over a period of profound cultural flowering known as the Palaiologan Renaissance. Scholars like Gemistus Pletho and artists like those who created the stunning mosaics of the Chora Church pushed Byzantine intellectual and artistic life to new heights, blending classical Greek philosophy with mystical Orthodox theology. Yet, while the mind of the empire was brilliant, its body was withered. While Michael Roman VIII focused on the threat from the west, a new power was consolidating in the hills of Bithynia. A small Turkic beylik led by Osman, I began to expand at the expense of the neglected Byzantine borderlands. These were the Ottoman Turks. They had captured the major Byzantine cities of Prusa and Nicaea. The Byzantines, crippled by a series of ruinous civil wars between 1321 and 1354, were unable to mount a coordinated defense. In 1354, a devastating earthquake destroyed the walls of Gallipoli, allowing the Ottomans to cross into Europe. Within a few decades, they had conquered Adrianople and reduced the Byzantine Empire to a vassal state, forcing the Roman emperor to pay tribute to the Ottoman Sultan. By the mid-15th century, the Byzantine Empire was no longer an empire. It was a single city-state surrounded by a sea of Ottoman territory. The emperors, desperate for survival, traveled to Europe to beg for aid, even offering to subordinate the Orthodox Church to the papacy at the Council of Florence in 1439. This union of the churches was loathed by the Byzantine populace, who famously declared, "Better the Sultan's turban than the Pope's mitre." In 1451, the young and ambitious Mehmed Roman II ascended the Ottoman throne. He had one singular obsession, the conquest of the Red Apple, the city of Constantinople. He began the construction of Rumeli Hisari, a massive fortress on the Bosphorus, effectively cutting off the city's lifeblood. The stage was set for the final act of a drama that had lasted over a millennium. Section 10, 1453, the final fall of the Roman world on April 6, 1453, the Ottoman army, numbering nearly 80,000 men, appeared before the Theodosian Walls. Facing them was a meager force of 7,000 defenders, including 2,000 Genos and Venetian volunteers led by the charismatic Giovanni Giustiniani. The last emperor, Constantine Roman XI Palaiologos, knew the odds were impossible. Mehmed Roman II brought a weapon that signaled the end of medieval warfare, the basilica, a massive cannon forged by a Hungarian engineer named Orban. This 27-foot monster fired stone balls weighing 200 pounds, battering the ancient walls that had stood for 1,000 years. Timber. The siege lasted 53 days. Mehmed even performed the impossible feat of dragging his fleet overland on greased logs to bypass the iron chain protecting the Golden Horn, surrounding the city on all sides. By late May, the defenders were exhausted. On the night of May 28, a final Psalma service was held in the Hagia Sophia. For the last time, Orthodox and Catholic, Greek and Latin, stood together in prayer under the Great Dome. Constantine Roman XI addressed his troops, telling them that they fought for 4 things: their faith, their country, their family, and their emperor. He then removed his imperial regalia, choosing to fight and die as a common soldier. At dawn on May 29, the final assault began. The Janissaries, Mehmed's elite shark troops, finally found an unlocked postern gate called the Kirkaporta. They swarmed into the city. Giustiniani was mortally wounded, and the defense collapsed. Constantine Roman XI was last seen charging into the fray near the St. Romanos Gate. His body was never found, giving rise to the legend of the Marble Emperor, who would one day wake to reclaim the city. When Mehmed Roman II entered the city later that afternoon, he rode directly to the Hagia Sophia. Seeing a soldier hacking at the marble floor, the Sultan struck him, declaring that the buildings were his to preserve. He ordered the church to be converted into a mosque, and the call to prayer echoed where the liturgy had been sung for 9 centuries. The Roman Empire, founded by Augustus and moved to the east by Constantine, had finally come to an end. The Middle Ages were over, and the world would never be the same. Conclusion: the fall of the Byzantine Empire was not merely the end of a state. It was the closing of a chapter of human history that linked the ancient world to the modern era. Of the Umayyad and Abbasid caliphates. Had the city fallen in the 7th or 8th centuries, the cultural and political development of Europe would have been radically different. Byzantium preserved the flame of classical antiquity through the darkest centuries of the early Middle Ages. While Western Europe struggled with the collapse of literacy and central authority, Byzantine scholars were busy copying the works of Plato, Aristotle, Homer, and Sophocles. When the empire finally crumbled, the flight of these scholars to Italy, carrying their precious Greek manuscripts, provided the intellectual spark that ignited the Renaissance. The legacy of Byzantium is woven into the very fabric of the modern world. Its legal system, the corpus juris civilis, became the foundation for the civil law codes of most European and Latin American nations. Its religious tradition, Eastern Orthodoxy, remains the spiritual home for over 220 million people. Its architecture, characterized by the soaring domes and shimmering mosaics of the Hagia Sophia, influenced everything from Ottoman mosques to Russian cathedrals. Even the concept of the modern state, with its organized bureaucracy, diplomatic corps, and professional standing army, finds its earliest medieval expression in the halls of the Great Palace of Constantinople. The story of Byzantium teaches us about the resilience of culture and the inevitability of change. It was an empire that spent its entire existence in a state of crisis, yet it managed to flourish, adapt, and reinvent itself time and again. It was a civilization that valued beauty and wisdom as much as it valued power. Today, as we look at the skyline of Istanbul or the icons in a remote Greek monastery, we are looking at the echoes of a lost world. The Byzantine Empire reminds us that no matter how mighty an empire may be, it is the ideas, the art, and the faith it leaves behind that truly endure. Refuse to fade into the night. Outro, if this journey through history captivated you, make sure you subscribe to Chronicles of History. We publish new documentaries every week. Tell us in the comments below, what do you think was the single most decisive moment in this story? Was it the disaster at Manzikert or the betrayal of the Fourth Crusade? And check out our other videos on screen right now for more epic history.